How different would your life be if you had grown up with your own banking system? Hello, hello, welcome back. For those that are new here, I'm Kristyn. I'm an authorized infinite banking practitioner, and I help Canadian families and business owners find peace in their financial lives and live the abundant life that they were born to live by taking over the banking function in their life. We take over their finances and redirect more money back into their pockets. So today I want to talk about what it could look like if you started your system when you were young. How different would your life be if you had grown up with your own banking system? I want you to imagine for a minute the hardships that you had maybe as a young adult, maybe it was later in life. But think about a time when you had difficulty. Maybe it was applying for a loan. Maybe you're self-employed and it was difficult getting a mortgage because you don't have the same the same T4s and those kind of things. The bank asks for a ton of information and it's hard to supply all of that. Maybe you ran into credit card debt when you were younger and you've had a lot of issues since then, or maybe even bankruptcy. I've been in that position myself and I know how hard it can be. This is the roadmap that I wish I had known 20 years ago. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story. My husband and I got married very, very young. We were 20 years old. We were really fortunate to buy a house right away. We closed on it, I think, a week before the wedding. But let me tell you, it was a fixer-upper. And when I say a fixer-upper, I'm not talking handyman special. I'm talking the person who owned it before us literally had something wrong with them and did a lot of really weird things. It had a little teeny tiny backyard, and there was a sunroom on the back of the house that, granted, you could see into all three neighbors' backyards from this room. And there was a toilet parked right in the middle of this room that had a shower curtain that went around it, I guess, for privacy. So when I'm talking, it was a fixer-upper. It definitely was. We paid $55,000 for it at the time, which was even then a huge steal. Except that it turned out to be a lot more foundational problems than we realized. So while we were fortunate to have the house right away, we really quickly found ourselves in an upside down mortgage where we owed more than the house was worth because we had put so much money into fixing it up. At the time, my husband was working as a sous chef. He was working for a new restaurant and they had just opened. They were expecting to do really well and then they didn't. And so at the time when we had a couple young kids at home and I was on maternity leave from my bookkeeping position, his checks from this restaurant started to bounce. This was 20 years ago when it would take a week for a check to come back and for the check to clear. So we didn't even know that the checks had bounced until we had already used the cash to pay for our mortgage. We paid our bills, we bought groceries. Every bounced check meant hundreds of dollars in overdrafts and late fees and NSF fees and you name it, everything compounded, okay? And then when it happened more than once, it just kept compounding. So even though it was a position that we were in that was no fault of our own, that these checks were bouncing, those checks had an impact on our credit score for years to come. We were just trying to get out of that cycle. It took us literally years, even after he obviously left that job and found something new. It still stuck with us because we had to keep racking up the credit cards and then we would pay the credit cards late because the checks would bounce or we would pay it and the payment would be reversed. So all of these things, it affected us for years and I'm not exaggerating on that. I still clearly remember that feeling of dread, knowing that we were hanging on by the tiniest thread. I remember counting every penny when I was grocery shopping and putting things into my cart. I knew down to the penny how much money I had spent. And then I would still pray as I ran my bank card that it would go through. So for us at that time, a flat tire wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a full day of missed work for my husband would impact us for weeks, if not months, because we needed every dollar that we had to survive and to get caught up. If we had a few $100 car repair, it may as well have been a few million because it felt so out of reach for us. During this time, my husband would joke that we were puh because we couldn't afford the full word poor. We laugh now, but what I know now is that we had to change our mindset before any of our circumstances could change. We had to get ourselves out of that lack mindset. So eventually, my husband left the hospitality industry and we moved to our dream home. It was an old farmhouse. We're still in it, surrounded by fields. We bought it cheap, we fixed it up, and we built equity again. But this time, we were really careful not to overextend ourselves. As our earnings grew, I took on a project manager position and I worked from home while I was homeschooling our kids. But it still seemed, even though we had all this income coming in, it still seemed like money was just flowing through our fingers. We seemed to be stuck in that same cycle of debt. The numbers were just way bigger. So we weren't drowning in debt. I didn't have to count pennies anymore, but the money just flowed out of our hands. And I knew that something had to change. Nothing was fixed. We had more money, but it was all flowing away from us. I was self-employed, which, as a lot of you may know, makes financing and getting approvals at the bank complicated or challenging. And I was still constantly living in this state of fear that we were like one disaster, a busted pipe or a natural disaster away from ruin. And then that's when I learned about infinite banking, and the rest is history. Now we flow our income through our policies and we capture as many dollars as we can. I sleep easy, knowing that we have a reserve of cash available when we need it for emergencies that come up. And on top of that, we have easy access to cash when opportunities arise. And trust me, when you have cash available, opportunities will find you. So here's what it could have looked like if we had known what I know today, if we had implemented this 20 years ago, back when we were first married. So the first thing we would have done was start small insurance policies before we even got married. So as soon as we got engaged, we would have started insurance policies so we could lock in the insurability while we were young and very healthy, and we could take advantage of the lowest rates. We would have saved for our wedding inside of our policies. And then we could have taken out policy loans to pay for our wedding instead of paying cash and carrying a balance on our credit card. We could have saved thousands of dollars in interest just from the wedding, and we would have only used our credit cards to accumulate the points and then paid them off at the end of each month. So we would have essentially bought an extra month of free financing. Fast forward to that time when we had all of those bounced paychecks. Yes, they would have been an inconvenience, but they wouldn't have been catastrophic. We would have had access to carry ourselves over, and we wouldn't have had to count on credit and had overdue credit cards and all of the NSF fees and all of those things because we would have had a reserve of cash that we could depend on to help us through. So we wouldn't have had overdue credit cards, and we could have skipped a few payments on our policy loans if money was that tight and we weren't able to. So we wouldn't have had all of those NSF fees that compounded on top of each other. If we had our policies in place to fund our house repairs, our mortgage would never have been upside down because we wouldn't have had to refinance it. We could have sold it when we wanted to. And even if our mortgage had been upside down, we would have had cash available in our policies that we could use for the down payment for the new house or to bridge that gap. We also could have self-financed all of our vehicles. We're at vehicles number 7 and 8 right now. Since we could have paid cash to the dealership, we would have negotiated lower prices and we could have saved even. If we had started this 25 years ago, back when we were first engaged, we would have had access to a growing pool of capital of over $500,000 today. And that's just the beginning because that's based on what we were earning then. If we had started it back then, we would have definitely outgrown our policies. We would have actually run out of room inside of our policies and we would have expanded our system. We also would have taken out policies on our kids at birth. So by the time they turn 18, and right now I have a 19, 18, and 16-year-old, by the time they turn 18, they would have had over $30,000 available in their own personal banks that they could be using for a down payment for a house or to finance their first cars or to start a business, whatever they like. We likely would have been mortgage free on our primary home and probably had a few rental properties on the side. But here's the thing, as much as I wish I had known all of this back then, I don't regret the path that got me here. If I hadn't gone through those hardships, I wouldn't have learned the lessons that I did. And I wouldn't have had those experiences that I'm sharing with you today. If someone had tried to teach me about infinite banking back then, I probably would have thought it was too good to be true and it was a scam, and I really wouldn't have listened anyway. In fact, if you had told me back then that one day I'd be standing here recording a YouTube video and talking about life insurance and selling life insurance for a living, I would have thought you were absolutely crazy. See, I understand what it feels like to be stuck, and I appreciate every time I go shopping that I don't have to count the total in my cart. I truly believe that our challenges led me here, and they gave me the passion to help save others from making the same mistakes that I did. The good news is it's never too late to start. We started in our early 40s, and I have clients ranging from 18 all the way through mid 60s that are practicing the infinite banking concept. So, in my family, we started in our 40s. We're working on policies for our kids. We have them on our oldest, and we're working on the two younger ones. My husband and I now run as much income as we can through our policies. And in our very first year of practicing this, we were able to pay an extra $40,000 off our mortgage just by redirecting the cash that's flowing through us anyway. We were able to keep more of that cash growing for us. And so now we've increased our net worth by more than double what we have put into these policies. We've also used our policies to finance a shed that we use as a storage facility that we rent out to one of my clients. And we've also used it to fund flood repairs when our basement flooded to the ceiling and insurance wouldn't cover most of the repairs. We had access to cash through our policies that we were able to use to pay the contractors and get it done when we needed it. It also supplemented our income while I was transitioning into this new career. And I had about 6 months where I didn't receive a paycheck. Our policies helped us get my business going, and we still use that to invest into my business. Of course, we all wish that we had started 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or even when we were babies. The reality is, most of us didn't. I wish that we all knew how powerful this was back then, but now that we know, we can do better. And so, regardless of where you're at in your journey, even if you think that this is something that you want to learn more about, but it's not maybe a good fit for you right now, or you don't think that you can afford it, or your finances are kind of all over the place, let's book that call anyway. Because the worst thing that'll happen is we'll sit down, you'll get some clarity on where you are, where you want to be, and what it can look like to get you there. So, as a first step, I would say we want to lock in the insurability, just get some insurance on you so that if something happened to you, if you had health concerns come up, and they can come up at any time. I've worked with many families that sadly, partway through the process, a family member gets sick or is in a car accident, and then it kind of derails the process for them, and we have to come up with a new plan. So that's the first step, really, is we want to book that call and get some insurability locked in on you while you're younger. Your costs are never going to be as low as they are today. If you want to find out more about how this works and how powerful the infinite banking concept is, and maybe learn a little bit more about whether it'll work in your life, check out my free resources below. If you are curious about how it can work for you specifically, I encourage you to book that discovery call. You'll find the link below. And then we'll review your unique situation. We'll look at what your goals are, where you're at, and how we can help bridge that gap. You'll have a personalized plan that'll help you achieve those goals and live the stress-free, abundant life that you were born to live. Thanks for joining. If you found this episode helpful, please give it a like and subscribe. When you're ready to take the next steps, I encourage you to check out the link in the description to access my free resources and to book a call. Your future self will thank you. Until next time, live free.